Let's bring in our two guests, please. Let's bring in our two guests. Joining us now, Morgan Ortagus, former State Department spokesperson, and Marc Thiessen, Fox News contributor. Thank you, kids. Appreciate it very much. I just want to ask you straight up. I'll start with you, Morgan. Given what we now know, yesterday the issue was, did Milley do this and say this? Today it comes out he did, and he's defending it. And President Biden is defending Milley for defending it. So I'll ask you, should, in your judgment, should General Milley resign?
I'd like to see what he has to say next week under oath. I think that's incredibly important. But I'll tell you what the most troubling thing out of all of this for me, Larry, is that there is a clear pattern that it's almost obvious that Milley has been talking on background or off the record to multiple authors and reporters. That happens in Washington, but never to the degree. I've never seen a chairman of the Joint Chiefs that has inserted himself into the press and into the books in real time the way this general has. It's time for him to answer these questions under oath, which I think he will take seriously.
Which, under oath, what's he appearing before? In Congress?
Yeah, next week he's scheduled.
The Senate Armed Services Committee.
And you think he'll take questions on this? I guess he can't escape it. You think he'll testify, Mark?
Yeah.
I think he will. I think he'll have to, and I think he'll have to answer questions on this. I mean, look, the reality is he's got a lot of questions to answer. And look, he's denying some of the things that are alleged. I think Jennifer Griffin reported he denies that he told the Chinese he would warn them. But there's a simple way to get to the bottom of it, which is release the transcript. Jennifer Griffin reports that there were 13 people in the room in the video conference, that there were notes taken. President Trump released his transcript of his call with President Zelensky. Why can't General Milley release the transcript of his call, and we'll find out exactly what he said behind President Trump's back.
So
and
you're
then
saying
the other thing yeah.
No, I was just going to follow up, Mark. Milley doesn't deny the calls. He's denying the content of the calls.
Jennifer Griffin said that he's quoted as saying that he told the Chinese in the Woodward Costa book that he told his Chinese counterpart that if there's not going to be a surprise attack, that if we have an attack, I'll warn you ahead of time. Which is, that would surprise any Chinese general who had read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, would be surprised that the enemy would give you an advance notice. But that's a terrible thing for any military leader to say. But again, we can find out exactly what he said to his Chinese counterpart by getting the transcript.
Can I raise it? Look, so Mark, are you voting should he resign, or you with Morgan? You want to wait until next week?
I want to see what he says. I'm with Morgan on it.
All right. You're both very easy on it. That's quite interesting. Do you honestly think, Morgan, that Donald Trump would have bombed China? I mean, Donald Trump would slap tariffs on China. I get you that. And he did. And I was part of that, for better or worse. Bombing China? Where'd that come from? I mean, to me, Trump's made strong statements about that. Where's that coming from? I mean, it's almost like reverse spin. You talk to your Chinese counterpart, we're not going to bomb you. So what does the Chinese counterpart think? They're going to bomb us. How weird is that?
Well, that type of discussion, obviously, from every senior leader is saying that wasn't going on. Further, the President, Trump, the last president, was very focused on holding China accountable for COVID-19, for holding the World Health Organization responsible, right? So it wasn't just the trade war. I mean, we saw that they unleashed this deadly pandemic on the world, and he was very focused on holding them accountable as well. So he was certainly tough on China. But again, as the president even mentioned the other day, he's one of the only presidents in modern history not to get us more entangled or more involved in conflicts. He was tough when he needed to. He released the Moab bomb in Afghanistan whenever at the early parts of his administration. And, he was certainly tough on Qasem Soleimani, who has now gone on, I guess, not to a better place, hopefully to a much worse place.
No,
so he's tough when he needed to. He used military force when he needed to.
He took out al-Baghdadi, but that's different than bombing.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So we'll wait for Milley. You guys have given Milley a little parole until next week. Okay, I get that. But I want to ask you something else, Mark. There's other stuff going on here. CNN is reporting, this is from the Woodward Costa book, okay, that Biden basically overruled his own military with respect to Afghanistan. And I find this to be very important. In some sense, maybe it's more important than the Milley stuff. Okay? Biden was bound and determined to get out as soon as possible. And there's a quote here. This is Jamie Gangel, Jeremy Herb, and Elizabeth Stewart, CNN. Quote, "The military doesn't F around with me," end quote. Biden told others. This is way back in 2009. And then they also write in the book now, Woodward and Costa write that Biden's Secretary of State Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin both pushed for a slower withdrawal after March meeting of NATO ministers. They actually wanted a gated withdrawal in steps, which is what Trump wanted, but Biden wouldn't do it. So, Milley could be a great chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Austin could be great DefSec, but Biden won't listen to him anyway. What do you make of that?
Well, this is my bigger problem with General Milley, and it relates back to the book, which is that he clearly did this interview with Woodward because he wanted to be seen as one of the adults in the room who restrained Donald Trump from following through on his worst instincts and avoided disaster in the final days of the Trump presidency. Well, why didn't he avoid disaster in the first 8 months of the Biden presidency? What did he do there? You know, if you go back and look, I mean, President Trump actually wrote up an executive order to withdraw all U.S. forces by January 15th from Afghanistan. And General Milley went into the Oval Office along with some of the other members of the national security team and convinced him not to do it, to leave 2,500 troops. They said that they pointed out the specter of Saigon, and did Trump really want that to be his lasting legacy? And Trump listened to them. Why was he unable to do that with Joe Biden? Why didn't he put his stars on the table and say, no, we're not going to give a Bagram Merguez. We're not going to put the security of our troops at the airport in the hands of the Taliban and the Haqqani network, which led to 13 dead Americans. We're not going to give it when the Taliban said, we're going to, you can take in charge of security of Kabul so you can evacuate your people. We're going to take that offer. We're not going to do this, and we're not going to engage in this disastrous withdrawal. Why didn't he push for that? He didn't put his stars on the table. He didn't do anything. And Joe Biden executed a far worse disaster than anything Trump might have done in his final days in office.
But Morgan, what the distinguished Marc Thiessen is saying, what I hear him saying, Morgan, I've got 20 seconds, is that Trump listened to his military advisors, but Biden did not. I give you the last word.
And that's why the testimony next week, Larry, is so important. Remember that Austin did not appear before this week. This week before Congress, he hung Blinken out to dry to take the heat from Congress, and that was certainly a poor showing. And so Milley is the only person we're going to have from the military to answer from this. And unfortunately, I think it needs more than one hearing. I mean, there's so much that is alleged between this book. We've seen a modern-day catastrophe in our foreign policy.
But Biden didn't listen to him. Biden didn't listen to him. If Woodward and Costa are right, that Biden didn't listen to him, that's very important. I mean, I've said this before.
Absolutely.
But it's also on them to put their stars on the table.
Well, okay, but if the president doesn't listen to him, Mark, you've been in the Oval. I sure been in the Oval. Look, I tell you this, people get on my case. I yearned for the calm, orderly days, and certainly more prosperous days under Donald Trump. Okay, because say what you will, Trump did listen to his military advisors. He even occasionally listened to his economic advisors or his trade advisors. He actually was a process president, all right? You may not have liked his tweets, but, you know, we got tough with China, and we had a roaring economy with tax cuts. I miss those days. I mean, Trump, you know, Biden doesn't listen.
He's the Middle East, too.
Yes, the Middle East, thank you. Anyway, I'm running out of time. Producers are screaming at me. Morgan Ortegas, welcome to the Kudlow Show, nutty as it is. Marc Thiessen, welcome back to the show. I hope you'll both return very soon. Coming up on Kudlow, the Democrat.